This is my Quest 2. I've had it for a couple of years now and I really enjoy VR gaming and I enjoy PC sim racing, and combining the two is a wonderful thing. And the Quest 2, I would say, is a very decent headset for PCVR gaming and very suitable for PC sim racing as well. So today's video is very much pivoted towards sim racing, but there's going to be things that carry over to anyone who wants to use this headset for PC VR gaming. But yeah, particularly because of performance issues with VR PC sim racing games, you need to have a strong PC. A lot of that's going to be really focused in that direction, guys. So a lot of tips and tricks and bits and pieces. So first off, I just want to start off with some basics of things you need to know and things that I would suggest you do, just as, you know, tips. Now, the first thing you'll notice is I do have a rigid strap on here. Now, the stock strap that comes with it gets the job done, but it is kind of junk, to be fair. And the first thing you want to do, really, guys, is dump this thing like that and get yourself a replacement head strap, because it'll be much more comfortable. You will really appreciate it, especially when you are playing VR games. You're sitting in that sim rig for hours on end. You want something that's comfortable and it's going to be well balanced. So the head strap I'm using here is my by far the favourite one I've used. I've reviewed a few head straps, but the one I always come back to is this one, and this is the one from Kiwi Design. And it is an excellent head strap. It's rigid, it's very comfortable, it's got padding, and it just basically fits my head perfectly. A head strap which I think will work for everyone. So I can highly recommend that one. Now, you also notice I do have a battery on the back, so that's just for extending my battery life on the headset when I'm playing standalone Quest games. So you can ignore that, really. But one thing it does offer by having a battery on the back, you can see the balance of it is improved. And again, for comfort for VR gaming, so important. So having that battery on the back, it doesn't matter if I'm PC VR gaming or using standalone, I'll leave that on there because it just improves the balance. So I would certainly recommend sticking a battery on the back of your headset anyway, or some ballast on the back of your headset if you're just going to be playing PC VR gaming, because it does make a difference. The other thing I'll say as a tip is I've replaced the facial interface as well. So let me just take this out. This is also from Kiwi Design. This is their fitness facial interface, and the difference compared to the stock one, which has foam on there. I know if you buy a Quest 2 now, they give you that silicone cover, but it doesn't breathe, it's uncomfortable, it gets sweaty and clammy. This is a fabric rather than foam. It's much more comfortable against my skin, and I just simply don't like using the foam. So this is much nicer. Also has some vent holes as well, and that helps it breathe, so you get less or no misting on the lenses. So I would certainly recommend two things when you get your Quest 2, regardless if you're going to be doing it for sim racing or just, you know, Quest 2 gaming or PC VR gaming, is change the strap and change the facial interface. So I'll put links to in the description, actually, because I have covered these in reviews, both of these devices, these accessories, that is. To tether your PC to your Quest 2 headset, you'll need to run a cable to it. And there's a few things you need to understand here. So let me go over that. So don't skip this, because it is actually quite important. So the first thing to know, guys, is it needs to be a USB 3.0 cable and also a USB 3 port on your PC, bare minimum. Otherwise, you won't have enough bandwidth. So you can't run it over USB 2, although it will connect and it will work. It will degrade the image that's being piped through to the headset due to the low bandwidth. So USB 3.0 minimum, okay? Next thing to do is you need to select a cable. Now, if you go to Amazon, which is likely where you're going to be buying your cable from, there's a lot of choices, but there's a few things you do need to understand first, because it's not as straightforward as you might imagine. So there's a lot of cables which are listed as USB 3.0 to USB-C, like this, so that plugs into the headset, of course. So if I take this off, we can see that. So we don't need this for the moment, since we're going to be plugging it into my PC. But you can see USB-C, USB-C of course, and then on the other end, USB 3.0 type A, which is your standard sort of cable on here, going into a USB 3 slot on my PC. Now that will work and it'll be fine, to a point. Now, one thing, there is a, well, I wouldn't say a problem, but there is a con here. So when you're using your PC VR headset, obviously it's going to drain the battery. So that's what's going to happen on the Quest 2. And there is a charge that comes through the USB 3.0, and it will help put a little bit of charge into the battery there, but it's not enough to sustain it. So over time, if I run this cable and play PCVR gaming, that headset battery will run dry and it will turn itself off. Now, you're going to roughly get an extra hour of gameplay, and what I mean by that is if I have a fully charged battery in my Quest 2 here and I start some PCVR gaming, you maybe get about 2 hours with the battery alone. But with this, you might extend it by an extra hour. So you get like 3 hours of gameplay before that battery will run dry. So do understand it's not going to maintain the battery over USB 3 because the actual voltage, the watts output of the USB 3.0 standard is not enough to sustain it. It's going to be around, I guess about 3 or 4 watts you're going to get out of this, which isn't enough. And you need more, closer to about 8-9 watts. So it's not going to be enough. So what you can do, which is the next option, if you can possibly do it, is USB-C to USB-C. So of course USB-C into the headset as before, but USB-C from the PC. Now that's assuming you have a one of these on your PC motherboard so you can plug this into. If that's the case, then you should be okay. However, some USB-C sockets on PCs won't necessarily be have the wattage output. So you might need to find out for yourself if it does have that. You might need to check with the with the motherboard manufacturer's instructions to see what the capability of that USB-C output is. But of course, it's going to have the bandwidth and it's going to be absolutely fine. But and if you don't have one of these on your PC, what you can do, which is another viable option, is get an add-in card. So a PCIe, USB-C, basically your add-in card, and that will then give you the capability to run one of these cables to the headset. So that's the other thing. So option 3, which is possibly the most viable one for most people, and this is quite a clever one. This is a cable which has a little box on here. So as you can see, it is just USB 3 on here. So it's going to have the same disadvantage as the white cable, the first one I have, where it's not going to be enough charge coming from the actual from my PC. But it does have this little breakout box on here. And on here is a USB-C socket. Now what you do here, take your Quest 2 charging adapter and basically plug it into that little breakout box there into your wall outlet, and this will now provide enough charge to keep your Quest 2 topped up. And there you go, those are your cable options for running your Quest 2 to your PC. Finally, in regards to attaching this cable to your headset, I would suggest you use something like this. This is a silicone strap. This is from a company called, I think, Rinky. I'll put a link in the description from Amazon where I found these. But these are really good because they're rubberized. They just grip the side of the headband here. And it fully supports this socket because you do need to make sure that is protected. And as you can see, if I put it on there, there's no longer any stress coming from the cable onto this socket here. Yeah, so if you just leave it hanging off there, you're risking breaking your headset, you're risking breaking your cable. So take the precaution of using at least one of these, maybe 2 of these. Potentially you could just use Velcro straps, but I do like using the silicone straps as they are rubberized and they just provide better grip. In the Oculus software, head over to Devices and we can see my Quest 2 is plugged in. Now, if we click on this line here, we can see it's connected and it is over USB 3. So that is a good start. So we can close that and click on the headset now. This brings up another panel. So I'm going to ignore most of this, guys. We just want to get down to the graphics preferences for now. But let me draw your attention to the USB test, something you might want to run. Now, when you run this, you can expect 2 to 3 gigabits per second. It will kind of change each time you run the test, but that's what you should expect over USB 3. So normally about 2.5, but you know, it doesn't really matter. That's certainly exceeding what you need to run the Quest 2. So what we're going to do now is go to the graphics preferences. If you haven't used the graphics preferences in the Oculus software, I do suggest you go there, as you will want to manually set this because the default will be at 72 Hz. That'll be the default. and the rendering resolution will be set on automatic. So it's basically automatically setting the definition, the quality, the sharpness of the picture. And you really want to do this manually yourself rather than letting the Oculus software manage this for you, since you can tune it to a better degree. So the first thing I'd say is ideally you want to use 80 or 90 hertz. 90 hertz is better than 80 hertz, of course. 90 hertz is 90 FPS opposed to 80 hertz, 80 FPS. So if you can get away with 90, great, but it really does depend on your PC. Now, I'd certainly avoid 120 hertz. There's no point. Your PC is going to have to work really hard to maintain that frame rate, and it's unlikely you're going to reach that unless you massively reduce the graphic settings in the game, and the game's going to look terrible. So you're going to aim for 90 or 80, really, and see how that works for you. As for the rendering resolution, well, again, this is something you're going to have to determine for yourself by testing this. Now, as a point of reference, what I've set it here, 4480 times 2256, this is a good sweet spot. I found this was a nice resolution, the picture was sharp, and my PC can handle this. Now, whether you can handle this with your PC is you're going to have to find out for yourself. Now, anything above this, if you start moving it up, it is relatively diminishing returns, and you're asking your PC to work harder. So I'd say as a baseline starting point, try this. If you need to work it down, fair enough. Just go down one notch and see how that works for you. This isn't too bad. I thought this was okay. This was fair. But as we start moving the rendering resolution down further, the image does start to degrade and it's less sharp and a little bit more fuzzy. So you get used to it if you have to, but be aware that, the lower rendering resolution is going to affect the quality of the picture you're going to see through your headset. Now we're going to head over to the Oculus debug tool. I want to show you something useful here. So you'll find that basically where you've installed the Oculus software. So typically your boot drive, your C drive. So programs, Oculus support, and Oculus diagnostics. So you can find that there, very clear. And then go to the Oculus debug tool here. So there's a lot of stuff here and you can ignore most of it. I wouldn't mess around with too many things here, and you may find actually some videos out there that will say try this, change this, do that and do the other. The only problem is when you do change some of these settings, you can maybe improve the picture quality, but you may add some latency to the actual delivery of the frames to your headset. And because we are trying to get this good balance, again, sim racing, you're trying to get this sweet spot. So I would not mess around with too many things here, but I do want to show you something you will want to change, and that is the encode bit rate. So basically that's the delivery of megabits per second of the data being sent to your headset, the quality of the picture. So that's the compression, that's what the picture bit rate is being sent to your basically headset. So zero, it's not zero in fact, the default being zero on here is basically 150 megabits per second. So that's the data being sent to your headset, and that is going to change the quality of the actual picture being sent to your headset. So 150 megabits per second. Now it's not perfect, but it's okay. Now if you increase it, you can basically improve the picture being sent to your headset because it's basically sending more data. Okay, so per second effectively. Now you can set this up to 500 megabits per second, and to do that you just type in 500, but that's kind of too much, and I did some testing here. There is a limit of diminishing returns. There's also an element of when you set it too high, you're adding latency, and we don't like that with sim racing. It may be okay with some other VR games, but sim racing, we want to try and keep this balance. Now I discovered that if you set it at 250, that does improve the picture quality, and it also doesn't introduce any latency, at least any latency I found. So I'm just going to enter 250, and I suggest you do the same there. The other thing I want to show you is under HUDs. So if we just open that panel here, and we can see visible HUD here showing none. So if we go here and select performance, what will happen is a small panel will open up on your headset when you're in game, and you'll find that very useful for doing some troubleshooting. So we'll get into that later when we're on track, but remember this because you will find this very useful. Okay, I have SteamVR running and my Oculus Quest 2 is hooked up to my PC. I've activated the link connection on the headset, which is of course important before you launch SteamVR. Now we're going to go to the settings, and I need to show you something important as it can be a little bit confusing. And so if we go here, what you're going to see is we have under general, you can see the refresh rate, that's 90, that's fine, that's what we set in the Oculus software. So if you do need to reset it, you do need to close SteamVR, go to the Oculus graphics preferences, and then change the refresh rate there, and then relaunch SteamVR for it to be replicated here. Now, what may confuse you is when you look at the resolution here, it's different to what we set in the Oculus software. And the reason for this is SteamVR is showing you the resolution per eye and not the combined resolution for both eyes. So that's why this number is lower, effectively half the number that's set in the Oculus software. Now, what you want to do here is leave this alone. You want it set at 100. Do not mess around with this because you're effectively going to change the resolution again. You're going to basically supersample or undersample that resolution that you set in the Oculus software. So the safe thing to do is always leave that at 100. Now, if you do need to reset the resolution and change it either up or down, quit SteamVR, go back into the Oculus software graphics preferences, change it there, update it there, and then come back into Steam. So that's the way you want to do it. Don't mess around with it in SteamVR. For the Oculus Quest, you set it in the Oculus software. That's how you want to do it. When you launch the game, you'll get two VR modes, SteamVR and Oculus VR mode. Of course, always launch with the Oculus VR mode, as it has been optimized for your headset. If you like my content, consider becoming a member to help support the channel. Click on the join button to find out more. We're using the Performance HUD from the Oculus Debug tool to monitor how things are running. When you're initially tuning your settings, it's also worth having this visible to help you understand where you're at with performance. I'm also recording at 60 FPS on the same PC running the game, which is having somewhat of a negative impact on my full potential, but that's okay for this demonstration. The main metrics of interest here are the app motion to photon latency, the performance headroom, and the app frame rate graph. App motion to photon latency is showing us the time it takes for your physical movement to be displayed on screen. We want to keep this below 80 milliseconds at all times. High latency introduces noticeable lag, so it is important to keep an eye on this. Performance headroom shows us the percentage of PC resources available that are not currently utilised by the game or the VR compositor. For a smooth stutter-free experience, this number needs to remain positive. And finally, the app frame rate is exactly what you expect it is. I'm running the headset at 90 Hz, effectively capping the frame rate at 90 frames per second. And ideally, that green line should stay straight without dipping. The odd drop is okay, but a large drop in frame rate will be obvious when the smoothness of the image is interrupted with stuttering. If you're struggling to maintain a smooth frame rate, you could try reducing the rendering resolution. This will have a significant impact to improve performance, but at the cost of reducing the image sharpness. Personally, I would try to avoid this if possible. The first thing to do is try adjusting the in-game graphic settings. Firstly, don't run anything at ultra, it's just not worth it. Experiment with medium and high settings and even some low settings with graphic elements that don't matter much. For instance, the grass detail is unimportant, so immediately set that to low. Also consider reducing or turning off the post-processing effects. You'll discover that each graphic setting makes a small impact in performance. So what you want to do is think about trading off the settings that matter to you and the ones that don't. And be prepared to spend a bit of time on this, as you will need to circle back to the graphic settings frequently, testing out different combinations to see what works best for you. Unfortunately, a significant resource hog are the other cars on track. If you're racing against AI, consider reducing the number of opponents. Some sim titles even have an option to cap the number of visible on-screen cars as a way to increase FPS. This is a setting that doesn't reduce the actual number of cars racing on the track, but reduces the number of cars visibly rendered in view on screen in front and behind your car. It will look strange at the beginning of a race if you're running a full field of 24 cars and you can only see 10 or a dozen or so cars, or fewer depending on your setting, but after a couple of laps when the vehicles have spread out, it's not that noticeable. So reducing the on-screen visible cars will help tremendously if you need to gain some vital FPS. And finally, don't forget you can free up some significant resources by running your headset at 80 or 72 Hz. I can observe that 90 Hz is smoother than 80 Hz, but at the same time it's not that bad in the least, and it still looks good, though if possible only drop down to 72Hz as a last resort. I find 72Hz is a bit jarring due to the fast motion in racing games, and quite noticeable when observing the scenery whizzing past. Side by side we can compare the performance metrics between 80 and 90Hz. Just that drop by 10 FPS is giving us a good gain in the performance headroom, and that means those freed up resources could be invested in higher graphic settings, or maybe at the very least could provide a consistent high frame rate without any stutter. In summary, image sharpness is important in VR, so only reduce the resolution multiplier, last if you have to. The first port of call is attack those in-game graphic settings first. That may be enough to get you set, and potentially with 80Hz instead of 90Hz, which I find to be a reasonable trade-off. So armed with that information, see how you get on with that. And that's all I want to cover in this video, basically the essential elements to help you get the most out of your Quest 2 for VR sim racing. Before I end this one, the game we're running here is Automobilista 2, and I can highly recommend this title. Not only is this an excellent sim title, also you won't find a more optimised VR racing game than this. And this is an area that certainly varies between the VR racing games currently available, so you do need to pick carefully. Plus an honourable mention to Assetto Corsa. That's a great title that looks amazing in VR, but be wary of applying custom shaders in VR, they can be hard on your system. If you have any tips, please feel free to share them in the comments, but for me today, I'm done for this one. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy simming and bye bye.